This is going to be a big one. This is going to be probably one of the biggest ones. I'm holding a ghost. It's 2 pages. Well, it's 1 page, printed double side. Stained with age and the arrogance of 2016. It's a list of names, what we've called the LP Connection for a decade now. And the reporter who typed this up 10 years ago told me it was a smoking gun for the Liberal Party insider heist of the century. The fix was in, and the prize was medical cannabis. Now it's 2026. 10 years later, we're doing a forensic reconstruction of this story. Did the people listed in this article indeed get filthy rich? Did the system hold them accountable in any way, shape, or form? Or did this whole experiment just implode? Well, welcome to a deep dive. We're pulling that thread. I'm Cy Williams, and this is The Deepest Cut. So this is the original report filed by Mary Elizabeth Woodside to High Canada Magazine in June of 2016, a decade ago. Allow me the luxury of reading it here for you before we break it all down. And I promise it's not a long article, but you'll find the names involved fascinating. Title is The Licensed Producer LP Connection by M.E. Woodside. Here's the real reason Justin Trudeau wants to come down hard on local community craft cannabis and local dispensaries, period. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the lame excuses he's been spouting, and everything to do with making a small group of political insiders and Liberal Party associates filthy rich, period. Dispensaries are necessary resource centers for medical patients who need reasonable access to cannabis. Now, number 1, Chuck Rafiki is currently the CFO of the Liberal Party of Canada, founder and former CEO of Tweed. Mark Zucklin, CEO of Tweed, former senior advisor to former Ontario Finance Minister Dwight Duncan. Norman Inkster, independent director at Metrum, former head of the RCMP. Dr. Joshua Tepper, independent director at Metrum, formerly assistant deputy minister at the Ministry of Health, senior medical officer for Health Canada. Tom Shipley, director of quality assurance, Tweed, formerly worked on toxicology research while at Health Canada. Mike Harcourt, chairman of True Leaf Medical Inc., was a former BC Premier. Cash Heed, strategic consultant with the National Green Biomed, former BC Solicitor General and former West Vancouver Police Chief. Herb Dwally, chairman, National Green Biomed, former Vancouver MP and federal cabinet minister. John Turner, medical marijuana applicant in Ontario with Cash Heed, also happens to be the former Prime Minister of Canada. Mr. Belleau, Board of Directors for Aurora, was a public servant in several ministries within the Ontario government. Brian Wagner, company founder and CEO, NHP Consulting, consulting for prospective LPs, was invited to play a strong role in Health Canada's Program Advisory Committee. Tim Humberstone, ABCAN Director, Senior Person in Charge, former 20-year member of the RCMP, including roles in municipal, federal, drug enforcement, and with the Joint Forces Organized Crime Agency. Wow, Tim, what a resume. Tim has also received extensive training by the RCMP in providing expert court opinion in the fields of cannabis trafficking and production techniques. Ivan Verana, founder of Asian Ross Consulting, speaker at the MMPR Summit. Previously, Mr. Verana worked for the federal government for over 15 years. He worked at the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, Finance Canada, and in various senior policy positions at Health Canada. At Health Canada, he was in charge of the team that developed the policy rationale which led to the implementation of the marijuana for medical purposes regulations. Mr. Vrana is also a regular lecturer at both Carleton and Concordia universities and teaches a course that examines the internal communication tools governments use to develop and to implement public policy. Sandy Pratt, Chief Financial Officer, Emerald Health, worked at Deloitte, which is an auditing firm involved in the Senate scandal. Vice President of Business Development and Executive Financial Officer of the Royal British Columbia Museum, which also happens to be a Crown corporation. Shane Morris, VP, Scientific Affairs and Stakeholder Relations, Hydropothecary CEO. Now, at the time of this writing, 2016, the Canadian Cannabis Corp. Since 2000, Shane has been in a range of leadership roles within the federal government, from Treasury Board of Canada's Senior Advisor, Cabinet Operations, on Regulatory Affairs to Director of Policy Leadership and Reporting for Resource Canada's Major Project Management Office. George Smitherman, THC Biomed, former Ontario Liberal Deputy Premier and more than 30 years dedicated to public policy fields at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels, where roles as Senior Advisor, Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, and Ontario's Minister of Health were held. Jake Ryan, Director of Security for Tilray, former RCMP intelligence officer and federal criminal investigator overseeing all aspects of Tilray's security protocols and operations. Ernie Eves, Chairman, Timeless Herbal Care, a Jamaican medical marijuana company, was a former Progressive Conservative Premier of Ontario. Kim Derry, a promoter of marijuana facility THC Meds Ontario, Inc., Deputy Chief of the Toronto Police Services under Mr. Chief Bill Blair, under Mr. Blair. John Reynolds, Advisor to Votis Innovative Pharmaceuticals, Inc., a former MP with the Progressive Conservative, Reform, and Canadian Alliance parties. Senator Larry Campbell, Advisor to Votis Innovative Pharmaceuticals, Inc., former RCMP police officer and Vancouver mayor, also sitting senator. Barry Daniel, Wildflower Head of Security, former Abbotsford Police Chief. Finally, Cam Batley, Aurora Senior Vice President, Communications and Medical Affairs. He was the former legislative assistant to the Canadian Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, where he was responsible for developing legislation and steering it through the House of Commons, as well as negotiating with opposition parties and stakeholders. And that was Mary. That was the article. What do you think? A little dry. I know it sounds like a lot of names, kind of dry. Let's get into it. Okay, let's look at the architects. Let's start with Chuck Rafiki. If this industry has a godfather, it's him. He was CFO of the Liberal Party and founder of Tweed. And in 2016, his name was the first name on this list. But let's look at the history. It's a story of corporate blood sport. Rafiki's being ousted from Tweed was the first crack in his facade. His transition to the mining model of cannabis was brilliant, but it drew a lot of heat. Was it an insider advantage or just sharp business? We'll look at the 2018 peak where he touched $115 million and compare it to the volatility of today. And then there's Mark Zeklin, Former advisor to Dwight Duncan. He rode the canopy growth wave all the way, and he's the perfect example of the policy expert who became a corporate titan. We'll break down how his trajectory from the halls of Ontario Finance to the CEO desk is actually the blueprint for the revolving door. And then we have the enforcers. Ryan Reynolds and the shadow play. And this is where it gets a lot darker. Okay, so first let's talk about Jake Ryan, the Director of Security for Tilray, a former RCMP intelligence officer. Sounds legitimate, right? But the courts tell a different story. We're diving into the Delaware lawsuits, allegations of a control group that treated a public company like a private ATM. And then John Reynolds, the advisor to Votis. We're connecting the dots in the U.S. racketeering indictment, and that's $1.4 million fraud scheme. And why do these names keep popping up in the legal cannabis world? We're investigating the theory that the cannabis industry didn't attract shady actors. It needed them to navigate the gray market. Now, let's talk about the revolving door, and that's Batley, Smitherman, and the bureaucrats. Now, you can't really have a heist without the people who know how to unlock the safe. Cam Batley and the Aurora era, well, this was the peak of the hype machine. And when the bubble burst, investors lost millions, and class action lawyers had a field day. Then, George Smitherman, the man who wore every hat in Ontario, Minister of Health, the Deputy Premier, I can go on, a leader of the C3, his involvement with the Orange scandal, O-R-N-G-E, Orange scandal, and his subsequent leap to the Cannabis Council of Canada isn't career growth, it is a master class in survival. Okay, so we asked you, our listeners, to dig into the documents, and some of you sent in your local files. And the consensus was the filthy rich label was actually a half-truth. The real money wasn't in growing the product. It was in the infrastructure of regulation, the consulting, the security, the lobby groups. Now, we're answering the big questions. Is the door still revolving? Why, yes, it is. Is the LP connection still holding the keys? Well, in some boardrooms, absolutely. But the market has matured, and many of these players have moved on to mining, tech, munitions, or retirement. So what have we learned? What have we learned from this 2016 list of potential fraudsters? What have we learned? Well, the first lesson we learned was that the insiders were the beta testers for a new kind of legalized corruption. Let's let that sink in for a second. Diversification, lesson 2, is survival. The ones who stayed rich weren't the ones who just grew weed. They were the ones who moved their money into safe sectors like mining and government contracts. Lesson 3, the paperwork never lies. This list was a map, and it led exactly where you would expect it to lead, to the people who knew the rules well enough to break them without consequence. This is The Deepest Cut. Keep questioning the list. I'm Cy Williams, and this has been our deep dive into the vault. See you next time. Stay lifted.